Welcome to San Diego Integral, February 10th, 2024. Our topic today, LSD and the Mind of the Universe, Diamonds from Heaven, presented by Chris Bache.
Welcome to San Diego Integral. I'm Tom Habib, and I'm a member of the leadership team. We have an exciting presentation today, LSD in the Mind of the Universe. We'll begin shortly, but I first wanted to mention that we're recording this meeting. If you prefer not to be seen on video, you can turn your camera off, although we love to see your reactions. The link to the recording will be posted on Meetup a day or two after this event on SDI's YouTube channel. Also, you can find future events on our website, either sandiegointegral.org, the Facebook page, or coming back to meetup.com. The advantage of joining one of these groups is that you'll automatically be notified for future presentations. If you have any questions today about these meetings, you're welcome to contact one member of the leadership team, any member. Next month, we're meeting March 9th, and the speaker is to be determined. But it's going to be similar to today. Chris was nice enough to do a pre-presentation of what he's going to talk about at the Future Human conference in May, and San Diego Integral gets exclusive rights to this. Finally, we invite you to make a small donation today to help cover the cost of our meetings and equipment. And you can make that donation at sandiegointegral.org. I want to introduce Chris. So as you've heard, he's going to be a keynote presenter at the upcoming ICON conference, the Future Human. Chris is a professor emeritus in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Youngstown State University, where he taught for 33 years. He is also adjunct faculty at the California Institute of Integral Studies and at the Noetic Sciences Institute, and also on the advisory council of Stan Grof's legacy training. One might ask, how does a boy raised in the deep South, that is Vicksburg, Mississippi, who was raised Roman Catholic and actually entered the seminary to become a priest, write a book about his 20-year journey with LSD? It appears that Chris's devotion to transformation appeared relatively early. Just as he was receiving his degree from Notre Dame's theology department and he was awarded award for excellence, he decided to leave Catholicism. This radical transformation occurred again at Brown University, halfway through his doctoral program. He realized that he had gotten what he wanted from biblical studies, and in his words, I changed horses and began again. Those of us in integral studies recognize this fidelity to what wants to emerge, although we may not always have the courage for radical transformations. Chris has now fashioned himself into a philosopher of religion. He settled into Youngstown University, where he would teach for the next 33 years. Along the way, another transformation was pending. Chris read Stanislav Grof work on the use of psychedelics in psychotherapy. The non-dogmatic influences of Buddhism and Houston Smith perennialism we know in Integral soon followed. Chris ended his psychedelic explorations in 1999, and it wasn't until 2009 he wrote his first book, The Living Classroom. Here he shared how his expansive consciousness seemed to impact his students in what he called leaky boundaries. Again, those of us in Integral recognize the psychoactive effect presencing has upon others. In 2019, he wrote LSD in the Mind of the Universe, Diamonds from Heaven, some of which he'll share today and at the conference. Please give Chris Bache a warm San Diego Integral welcome.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Since my understanding is that psychedelics is not a frequent topic in the integral community, in the San Diego integral community. So in talking with Kathy and Tom and people on your board, we decided that we'd begin with a short breakout before I talk, before I say anything, just to do a quick inventory together of what each of your backgrounds is with psychedelics, both in terms of whether you have any psychedelic experience, and if you have, what have you had it with, what context, real short. And the second part is, what kind of beliefs have you formed about psychedelics, either from your own experience or from your reading or conversations with other people? So both, what is the nature of your experience, and what are your beliefs and perceptions about psychedelics? So we'll do it before, and then after I talk, we'll do an after. Okay, so just about 10 minutes, and Kathy will break you up into groups. Kathy?
Breakout sessions are not recorded.
Okay, is everybody back?
Yeah, I think we're back.
We're all back. Okay. I sure wish I didn't want to encroach on your freedom. I didn't want to be part of the groups. I wanted you to have complete freedom to be able to say what was on your mind. But I sure wish I could have been on the fly in the wall and heard your answers to the questions. Maybe when we get a little farther down the line this evening in dialogue, I can learn what some of your answers were to the questions. So, all right. So we've kind of looked at our history in terms of our own experience with psychedelics and what our own beliefs, positive, negative, or neutral around psychedelics. And now I'm just going to jump in and take you on a ride, give you an overview of my work that I've reported in my book, LSD and the Mind of the Universe. So let me share a screen here. First of all, let me ask first, how many people have read my book? Just perfectly okay if you haven't. How many people have? Just wondering. Okay, good. All right, good to know. All right, let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, and this...
Just confirming we can see your screen.
You can see, good. Am I seeing, whoop, supposed to go back. All right, okay. Somehow, I wish I could get the whole screen to show. Okay. So I'm an unusual person in that I've been a university professor all my life, a professor of religious studies, teaching in a small college, state college in Northeast Ohio. And I've also done one of the longest regimens of high dose LSD work that I'm aware of. In the background. I couldn't talk about it until after I retired because the good state of Ohio, the citizens of Ohio don't like their university professors doing massive doses of LSD on the weekends. But so the hardest thing about trying to introduce my work for the first time is how long it lasted and how many layers of consciousness I accessed in the process of this long 20-year journey. And I think that many of our expectations about where psychedelics can take us or should take us have been shaped by accounts based on a very small data set. For example, When Aldous Huxley wrote his very important book, Doors of the Perception, in 1954, he had taken mescaline only one time, and he took psychedelics only a total of 10 times in his life. Similarly, when Houston Smith, the great historian of religion, wrote his book, Cleansing the Doors of Perception, he had taken LSD only 6 times. After that, he said the bummers increased, and that led him to take Alan Watts's advice: when you get the message, hang up the phone. But notice, this gives a sense that you do psychedelics, you get the message, that's it, that's what it's about. And my book is what happens if you don't hang up the phone. But moving on, we go to Michael Pollan's very influential book, How to Change Your Mind. And Michael had taken psychedelics only about a half dozen times by the time he wrote this book. Other developments have tended to give us a sort of a shortened metaphysical horizon in terms of what we can expect to experience with psychedelics. For example, the psychedelic renaissance right now is focused on exploring the capacity of psychedelics to heal the wounds of the personal psyche. If you're in touch with the psychedelic literature, it's dominated by the studies which are demonstrating psychedelics' various capacities to heal the wounds of life, whether it's post-traumatic stress or depression or addiction. We're finding they're very powerful, but this tends to focus us on the horizon of the personal unconscious. A second use of psychedelics, different but similar, is using psychedelics for spiritual awakening. As we see in this anthology, Zigzag Zen, which is a discussion between the psychedelic community and the Buddhist community on the relevance of psychedelics for spiritual awakening. But still, we're still thinking in terms of a kind of an individual level, individual spiritual enlightenment. These two categories, the therapeutic and the spiritual awakening, these are the major kind of topics that come up for discussion, I think, in today's psychedelic renaissance. And my work is different than this. I was trained as a philosopher of religion. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm not a psychologist. I primarily have been interested in the philosophical potential of psychedelics. So my work really falls into a third category where the project is cosmological exploration, not healing, not really aiming at awakening, but using these deep non-ordinary states to explore the deep structure of reality. Now, my work descends or derives from Stan Grof. I was just out of graduate school and I encountered this book by Stan, Realms of the Human Unconscious, which was followed by his manual LSD psychotherapy. And of course, all the dozen or 15 or so books that followed, very important works. And in these two early works, Stan clearly differentiates between low-dose psycholytic therapy and high-dose psychedelic therapy, a very different therapeutic regimen. Psycholytic, healing the unconscious layer by layer like an onion. Psychedelic, trying to generate a breakthrough, one maximum supreme dose kind of approach. Here, the Spring Grove Hospital was working with terminally ill patients, trying to trigger something approximating a near-death experience to give them a glimpse of where they were going when they died. But the psychedelic therapy was limited to 3 doses, 3 sessions. So you have low dose, many sessions, psychedelic, very few. I came along in 1978 and I thought, well, if you could do psychedelic therapy 3 times, you could probably do it safely more than 3 times. So for various reasons, I chose to work in a psychedelic therapy protocol. And in the end, between 1979 and 1999, I did 73 high-dose LSD sessions. Actually, I did 3 moderate doses, but then I did all high dose
Oh,
the remaining
say,
70.
can you see by the dawners of night?
Okay. So I just say 73 high dose sessions. And I did this in a very rigorous fashion, following Stan's protocol. In my case, I used the same protocol, same set and setting, same substance, same dose level, same sitter, same recording process, and same location. I tried to standardize all the variables as much as possible so as to ensure clean and consistent recurring contact with the deep structure of the deeper levels of consciousness. And when I got to the end of my journey and was trying to organize the sessions into the narrative that I put into the book, I began to realize that this really was a very different undertaking than psychedelic therapy. I was dealing with a number of different issues that don't come up in psychedelic therapy. And so I felt the new terminology was required. And so I call my protocol psychedelic exploration. It's not really therapeutic in its agenda. It's psychedelic therapy in its techniques. It's high dose, isolated shades, sitter, music, the whole thing. But it is more than 3 doses. It's, in my case, 73. And the project in psychedelic exploration is cosmological exploration. It's not primarily healing, though there was a great deal of healing. It's not primarily spiritual awakening. It is exploring the deep structure of the universe. So I kept very detailed records of everything going through, even looked at some of the astrological variables, kept records of every session made within 24 hours of the session itself. And what I'm writing about in LSD and the Mind of the Universe is not primarily my personal story. I mean, it's all personal, of course, and I own it. But these lines represent a series of sessions, and the small circles represent what's taking place in the beginning and ending of a session. The large circles are what's taking place during the peak hours of the session. And LSD in the Mind of the Universe is basically describing what took place in the peak hours of the sessions over the course of 73 sessions. It's primarily a cosmological narrative. It's not a therapeutic narrative. I drop out a lot of the examples of personal healing or personal insights, which were given to me before at the beginning and ending of the sessions. But when I was operating in the peak session, I was usually operating far beyond personal reality, the personal segment. And that's the part that I think has the most important philosophical relevance, the cosmological relevance. So just to give you one more important concept before we turn to looking at the book itself, it's what I call the spiral of death and rebirth. Everything below this line is time and space in our ordinary consciousness. Above the line, transpersonal consciousness. The drop at the bottom of this, what my students sometimes would call the pantyhose model of consciousness. This drop represents egoic consciousness, our time-space identity. Everything above the line between the blue lines represents various orders of transpersonal consciousness. And of course, to make a transition from our egoic space-time identity into spiritual reality involves going through some type of death of self or ego death in order to basically let the programming of our time-space identity be dissolved or be shattered or be melted so that we can enter into deeper states of consciousness. And while ego death gets a lot of the attention in the therapeutic literature, and appropriately so, in my journey, ego death turned out to be only one of a number of deaths that took place at different levels of the journey. And this is what I call the spiral of death and rebirth. What I found is that when you're entering a deeper level of transpersonal consciousness, you have to go through a death and rebirth even after ego death. You go through multiple layers of deaths and rebirths. And the nature of that death is it's tricky to describe because it's a type of death and rebirth that takes place far beyond egoic consciousness, far beyond anything to do with space-time consciousness, and it changes as the adventure deepens. And here I use Stan and Ken Wilber's categories of psychic, subtle, and causal reality to describe some of these levels. I don't have any vested interest in a particular cosmology, a particular identifying of levels or rating of levels. This is basically just to indicate a pattern. And the pattern is there are many levels of consciousness in spiritual reality, and you go through many levels of death and rebirth if you access these levels of consciousness in a systematic fashion. And this is why I emphasize the standardization of the protocol in my work, because I think the more standardized our protocol, the more we basically return to the same membrane, the same platform of interface between our individual consciousness and this larger consciousness. And it makes, in my case, it led to a perpetual deepening of the experience, a perpetual series of initiations and entering into deeper communion with the creative intelligence of the universe. Now, when I got to the end of my journey and was working on preparing for the book, doing the book, I identified 5 areas or cluster areas or levels of consciousness that my experiences could be grouped in. So here are the 5 levels that stand out for me. One is the level of personal mind, collective mind, or our species mind, archetypal mind, causal oneness, and diamond luminosity. So what I'd like to do is simply go through and throw up the chapter titles of the book and organize them according to these levels of consciousness and give you a quick overview, a quick thumbnail of just some of the stages of this journey. This is extremely frustrating for me to do because just to convey adequately the content of one deep psychedelic experience is very challenging and would take a while. Juliana of Norwich, the great British mystic, spent decades digesting one particular spiritual near-death episode experience that she had. And to try to summarize 20 years of such experiences is challenging, especially, and I should have mentioned this before, I was working at 500 to 600 micrograms, which is about at the peak of what the body's tolerance is in terms of you don't get higher if you take more. So I was working with very high doses, and this is a protocol I do not recommend today. If I were doing it myself again I would do it differently. I'd be much gentler on myself, but nevertheless, this is what I did, and this is where we went. So let me just go through them. First, the level of personal mind. This is a chapter called Crossing the Boundary of Birth and Death. This is what Stan Grof calls the crossing the perinatal level of consciousness, the level of consciousness between our time-space identity and spiritual reality. It involves confrontations with death, lots of fetal sensations, often reliving one's birth, very extreme, facing deep alienation. The question is whether life has any meaning whatsoever, because everyone we know and everything we know and everyone we love is going to be dead, including ourselves. How can there be any meaning in a universe where everything of value dies? Which eventually culminates in our time-space identity, our ego-death identity being turned inside out. And for me, this took about 10 sessions and 2.5 years of work until eventually the universe got me to a point where it just snapped me like a twig. It turned me into the exact opposite of everything I'd ever known myself to be and radically expanded the boundaries of my awareness. I thought I was a male, white university professor concerned with the meaning of existence. It turned me into hundreds of women, women of color, women who had no interest in philosophy or the meaning of existence. and it just snapped me. It forced me. It just snapped me. And the message was, where you are going, gender does not exist. Let go. And of course, the problem was not women or education or anything like that. The problem was the tight role that my social identity had on me that was confining the limits of my experience. After I let go and surrendered, I was taken under the arm of the Great Mother and given a wonderful, long, many-hour journey into the world of women, becoming hundreds of women in all sorts of life circumstances. And then the journey continued. The next several sessions come under the category of collective mind, ego mind, excuse me, species mind. Now, working at those levels, the way I worked, my experience was that more or less every session began with the first portion of the session being a purification, detoxification process, the dying process. The second portion of the session being a transcendent experience, an ecstatic experience, transpersonal teaching, instruction. And so on the first half of the next year of session, I entered a domain that I came to call the ocean of suffering. I was repeatedly and systematically immersed in a collective anguish that shattered all my frames of reference. It completely dwarfed the previous phase. I entered a domain that expanded to encompass the entire history of the human species. The dying in this level was almost entirely collective. The surrender was the surrender that was demanded was the ordeal of repeatedly opening to the sheer enormity and savagery of the ocean of pain that I was encountering. I did not understand what was happening, but for several hours in every session, and then it would get into this ocean of suffering, and then I would be spun into what I'll describe in a minute. At first, I thought this represented a deepening of my ego death, but it went on for so long, and it involved so many thousands of people that I eventually came to a very different conclusion. And this is really the major theme of my second book, Dark Night, Early Dawn. And that is, I think what happened is in my sessions and in many of our sessions when we reach this level, the universe used my sessions not to heal me or not to try to enlighten me, but to heal some aspect of humanity at large, to heal some aspect of the collective psyche. And just as an individual internalizes trauma in their unconscious, which then distorts their well-being, the human species likewise internalizes all the trauma of history, anything that's not resolved by the end of our individual lifetimes. The species internalizes all the trauma from all the wars and all the deaths and all the droughts and all the hunger. And it aggregates in the collective psyche, distorting the functioning of the collective psyche. And in these unusual, highly expanded, amplified states of consciousness, I think what happens is we open up to the depths of the collective unconscious, and in that process, we have an opportunity to take on and experience some of the depths of these terrible memories, and in that process, lift them from the collective psyche. Now, when I went through each stage, each day of the collective ocean of suffering in the first year, in the second half of the session, I entered what I came to call deep time in the soul. For 7 sessions, an entire year, I entered a reality where I experienced my entire life from beginning to end as a completed whole. I moved beyond linear time, not into eternity. In between linear time and eternity, there are many modalities of time, and these I came to call deep time, where you could experience different spans of time as simultaneously present, or you could experience time speeding up or moving into evolutionary speed, so to speak. For 1 year, I experienced my life in all of its moments from start to finish as simultaneously present now. It was a very powerful distillation of my life's work, of who I was doing this work with, what my life was about. And at this point, this represented 4 years of work and about 18, 17 sessions. And at this point, I stopped my work for 6 years for reasons that I go into in the book. 6 years later, I started my work again. And when I did, the ocean of suffering began exactly where it had stopped 6 years before. So there was a year of the ocean of suffering before my 6-year break and a year of the ocean of suffering after that 6-year break. And the precision with which this started again and kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper is a measure, I think, an indicator of the magnitude and precision of the intelligence which was guiding these sessions. In the positive side, once I went through the ocean of suffering in this next year of session, I entered a domain of consciousness which took me radically beyond anything to do with my personal reality into the universe, the mind of the universe, in the section I call Initiation into the Universe. Different time of life, different expectations, different astrological transits, deep into the belly of the universe. I was given a series of carefully orchestrated teachings, initiations into the cosmic order of things. Now, I always give all my sessions a name, just simply as a mnemonic device. I write down my sessions, I put them down on bullet points. I give them a name in order to help me remember, because I want to remember my entire journey all at once. The names help me. Here are the names of the sessions that I present in this chapter, Initiation into the Universe. And you can see just from the nature of the names how profoundly transpersonal these experiences were. And frustrating not to be able to tell you more about them, but I just can't, there's not time. A deep excursion in like cosmology 101, how the universe works at a fundamental level. When the ocean of suffering came to a culmination in the 24th session, Healing the Collective Wound, there was sort of an orgy of feeding on the pain, and it reached a culmination, and I was spun into a level of reality that I came to understand as archetypal reality. And I discussed this phase of the work in the chapter, The Greater Real of Archetypal Reality. This lasted about 11 sessions and 1.5 years. And every time I entered this reality, I entered a level of reality that was more real than space-time. It's a very disorienting experience at first, but every time I went there, I was engaging something that was more real than space-time and also ancient. It was just ancient beyond imagination. Time worked at a completely different scale there, a completely different order of reality. I felt like Plato's prisoner, having climbed out of the cave, entering in a more real level of reality in the universe than my own existence in space-time. When I began to enter archetypal reality, I went through a death process in which I had to die as a human being per se. That I found that there is a level of identity that we hold in our psyche simply by virtue of being a human being. It's more fundamental than ego identity. And to go through species ego death, or to slough off your entire history as a human species and all the cognitive parameters that go with being a member of the human species, is a deeper form of surrendering to the great unknown than simply letting go of your individual egoic identity. The transition was to very, very high levels of energy. I learned in the process that deep levels of consciousness are driven by high levels of energy. The deeper you go, the higher the energy. And if you want to have abiding, stable experiences in these levels of reality, you must go through the purification, detoxification process that allows you to maintain clear cognition at these deep levels of reality. And that means submitting yourself to these levels of energy, which in my case had the flavor of white hot lava flows, exploding sun flares, liquid fire pouring through me, changing me completely. Now, I would experience archetypal reality as having two levels. One is kind of the Platonic type level where I experience principles or beings. I don't really want to call them beings because that makes them sound too compact. More principles, cosmic principles that were clearly the constitutive principles responsible for creating space-time and some of the structures in space and time, but they were so large, so vast, I could not wrap my mind around them. The best my mind could do to giving them some type of semblance of form is that I saw them as galaxies, hundreds of light years across, but galaxies, very vast, moving on a different order of scale than our small solar system. So I spent some time there, and then I also spent some time in experiencing at what you might think of as a more Jungian level, the living tissue of our species. I was given the experience over and over again of experiencing our species as a single being, a single mind, and each of us are cells within this mind, fractal iterations within this mind, and even each of our bodies cell within the collective body, so that there was nothing private about our existence, neither our personal psychological issues or our physical issues, our diseases, all of them were in a back and forth process, osmotic process between the individual and the species as a whole.
Chris, can I ask a question here?
Sure.
So, I mean, this is a really good point where you are right now, because
Mhm.
in the book, you mentioned, how we're being guided gently, that when we have deep, subtle intuition or something in creativity, would it be correct to say it's either these cosmic principles or the council of the elders influencing our development now, that we're not alone?
We are absolutely not alone. The universe is the hyper intelligent, hyper conscious, hyper compassionate, hyper wisdom. It infuses us every minute of the day, whether we're paying attention to it or not, taking advantage of it or not. But if we tune into it, if we step away from our narrow focus and tune into deeper levels of our consciousness, which then open into subtler and subtler levels of consciousness, one does receive help. One receives healing and advice and insight. And these come from multiple potential levels of consciousness. And so I would hesitate to identify a source that they would come from. It's more a matter of an infinitely deep source that you can draw from at multiple different levels. Yeah.
So, a lot of integral people, they're aware of in a moment of creativity,
Mm-hmm.
in connection, that somehow they become a vehicle for what wants to be expressed.
Absolutely.
So that's an alignment.
Yeah, a deep alignment. You just become transparent. I mean, basically, when you drop underneath your personal identity, when you kind of pierce the membrane and pop the bubble and drop beneath that, and then into the mind of the species, and beneath that into the different levels of the creative mind, you become transparent. The joy is that in becoming shunyata, empty of self, becoming transparent. I like that translation of shunyata, transparent. You become transparent to these deeper orders of awareness that then kind of come through you. They nourish you with healing, with love, and with insight and creativity. Yeah.
One final comment
Yeah.
is whatever this intelligence is in the universe is grooming us to participate in this intelligence.
Grooming might be a little strong, but I understand. I want to say yes, but I might sort of choose different more words than grooming. But it and we are of the same stuff. It is large, we are small, relatively speaking, but we are of the same part, of the same stuff, and we are always in communion with each other. So it's more like older brother, older sister, younger sister. I think of the spiritual universe. Dwayne Elgin talks about it as the mother universe, and time space is the daughter universe. And so naturally, there's a relationship between mother and daughter. You wouldn't say the mother is grooming the daughter, but the mother brings the daughter along. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I began to have experiences at this level of reincarnation as a collective process. I had experiences in which I witnessed the entire planet and the entire species reincarnating in a pulse that moved through history. So I had written my book. My first book was on reincarnation, and so I construed reincarnation classically the way it's usually construed, as a story of the soul's journey toward enlightenment, lifetime by lifetime, making progress, clearing mistakes, so on and so forth. But it was an individual journey. We're all on individual journeys. And here instead, I was dissolved into the species as the entire species went into an intelligent, articulate, collective karma, though that is too crude a phrase, an intelligence that was growing itself generation by generation, generation by generation. And somehow all of our individual soul projects fit inside beautifully, magnificently inside this collective soul project. Now, here are the names of the sessions that I address in this particular chapter. I won't go into them, but except to mention, notice how much cleansing is still taking place at this pretty advanced level. Session 28 was a very deep session. It was an archetypal meltdown. It threw me very briefly into the next higher level of consciousness, a very extremely pure, clean, crystalline level of consciousness. And even though I was only in that reality for a number of minutes, I think it triggered a cleansing, a detoxification that lasted 6 months and 3 sessions, just an ordeal of just cleansing and cleansing and cleansing. Hard to describe the cleansing because it's not a matter of personal history. It's partly biological, it's partly emotional, it's partly subtle energy. It's just a radical cleansing in order to allow me to come back into that highly pure, highly refined energy with clear cognition, which took place by the 32nd and 33rd session, and then continued into the next year of a year that I describe in the book called A Benediction of Blessings. This was an extraordinary year after archetypal reality, in which I was given just a series of one extraordinary transpersonal blessing after another. These are the 4 sessions that covering a year's work that I address in the book. The forest was an experience of oneness and no self, shunyata, emptiness of self, no self in me, no self anywhere in the world, a universal force running through the forest, not caring at all whether it's animating a pine tree or an oak tree. Deep experience of oneness. And oneness and emptiness are two sides of the same coin. Yeah. When you experience deep oneness, it's immediately obvious that there is no separate self anywhere in the world. We are all interdependent and intertwined. And when you experience deep no self, then oneness, the oneness of life, manifests spontaneous. It's just they go hand in hand. Singing the universe away was an experience, a deep experience of the void, the primal void out of which the universe springs. Jesus's blood was an experience of cosmic love, being loved more deeply than I'd ever known love in my life, just overwhelming immersion in cosmic love. In the birth of the diamond soul, I just want to mention this because it'll come up later. How to put this succinctly? I experienced all of my former lives coming into me, just like wrapping string around a kite spool, just coming back very fast. I had done 3 years of past life hypnotherapy, and I had a pretty good sense of some of my former lives, but they came back very quickly, and they reached a point where they seemed to hit a critical mass, and they fused. And when they fused, there was an enormous explosion, and the diamond light broke out of my chest and catapulted me into a very high and subtle state of consciousness in which I was an individual, but I was an individual beyond any frame of reference that I had known up to that point in time. And over time, this is what I came to understand or call the birth of the diamond soul. My understanding is when we die, we return to the soul, which is the larger consciousness that holds all of our experience. When we incarnate, we shrink down, get small focus. When we die, we get large. When we incarnate, we get small, so on and so forth. But we return to the soul, if all goes well, many times after our incarnations. What's happening here, I think, what happened in my session, and I think what's happening in our historical progression, is that the soul is being born inside time and space. That if you keep going back and forth between expansion into the world of spirit and back into time and space, and you keep this up long enough, thousands and thousands and thousands of years, sooner or later, doesn't it make sense that the soul would awaken eventually inside our incarnate existence? So that the awareness of identity, or the nature of identity that we claim in that incarnation, is the soul as our identity. And with this comes a vast expansion of the heart, a deep opening of the mind, a deep embrace of compassion or awakening of compassion, the birth of the diamond soul. I was 15 years into my journey. I had received more blessings than I could have imagined. What I had been asked to give something in the ocean of suffering work, and I had been rewarded with more blessings than I could count. But there was still 5 years remaining in my journey. And this is when I went through yet another death and rebirth process and entered what I call the domain of Diamond Luminosity. I entered a reality that was exceptionally clear. It was light, but a particular quality of light. I had known light many times before. People often experience great light when they go through ego death, and I had, and at different stages, I'd experienced light. But when I talk about the diamond light, I'm not simply using a metaphor for the light. I'm trying to describe a particular quality of light, exceptionally clear, very, very pure, just so clear it takes your breath away. This is what I think Buddhism calls Dharmakaya, the clear light of absolute reality. Over the next 4 years and 26 sessions, this is about a third of all the sessions I did, I only entered this reality 4 times. Here are the names of these 4 sessions. in between these sessions, more purification, more detoxification, more teaching, more absorbing of lessons. But these 4 immersions into the crystalline quality of diamond luminosity. Again, so much to say and so little time, I'm just going to have to stop. I'll mention only that the first 2 sessions took me deeper and deeper into the diamond luminosity. And after that, there was a reverse, a pivot. And then in the last 2 of these sessions, the diamond luminosity was crunching itself deeper and deeper into my mind, into my personality, into my physiology, into my biochemistry. And it was in the 50th session that I had a particular experience in the diamond luminosity that changed radically my understanding of existence. One of the reasons I pushed so hard in my work is that I thought the purpose of this work was to get to a particular condition, to get to an end stage, to get home, to become one with the universe or one with the metacosmic void. And I had many experiences of oneness and had learned that there are degrees of oneness. And I had had experiences of the primal void and had learned that there are even degrees of the void, though that sounds like a contradiction in terms. But in the peak of the diamond luminosity, when I was as deep into the diamond luminosity as I would ever go in my journey, I was sitting and resting comfortably intact in a deeply blissful state, and my visual field pivoted 90 degrees, and a circle opened, and I saw in the far, far distance a reality far beyond the diamond luminosity, and there was a domain of light there, and a ray of light came out of that reality and hit me, and it absolutely shattered me. It took me minutes to recover. And that's when I understand that it's an infinite progression. We'll never get to the end of it, even using this very aggressive mode of transition, of exploration. I would never get to the end. The mind of the universe is just too vast, too big, and that the thought, there is a homecoming to this work, and one does experience homecoming, but the idea that there is an end to get to that will change everything, I don't think so. Oneness is a beautiful, powerful, important teaching, but even oneness does not exhaust all there is to learn from the universe. Now you notice that I've skipped a chapter 9. I'm going to try to speed this up here. And this is the chapter called The Birth of the Future Human. When I began this work in 1979, I never imagined that humanity's future would become part of my journey. And now I think this chapter may be the most important chapter of the book, because it speaks to the fate of our planet, the fate of our species. It speaks to our children's world, our children's children as far as we can see. It speaks of a crossroads that humanity is coming to, and of the powerful forces taking us into a future that will change us at the deepest levels of our being. Now, what I did is that over the course of my journey, I had numerous visions that kept popping up here and there, different visions about humanity's spiritual evolution, where humanity was, that humanity was coming to a turning point, a before and after moment in history. This kept coming up in lots of different places. So what I did was to, rather than address them all piecemeal, chapter by chapter, I gathered them all into this particular chapter, and I broke this down into 2 sections. The first are the visions of awakening, which are a series of visions that I had over a 4-year period, back from 1991 to 1994. Those visions, the title of those visions, I'll give them here, and I don't want to take the time to go into them, but basically it was an extraordinarily positive assessment of where humanity is, that we were being guided by a guiding intelligence, that this guiding intelligence was trying to awaken not just individuals. It was intent on awakening the entire species as a single being, taking us into a different epoch in our evolutionary development. We were entering a period of intense collective purification, a dark night of our collective soul, and then a brief experience of the future human, which I think represents a shift in the plate tectonics of the collective psyche. The future human is not simply an awakened present human, but literally a different kind of human, the next iteration of the human species. Nowhere in my journey, however, had it told me how it was going to pull this off, how we would possibly make this transition in such a short period of time. And then in 1995, in session 55, in the middle of the Diamond Luminosity work, I had already gone into the Diamond Luminosity twice. I would go into it twice more. When I was expecting to be taken into the Diamond Luminosity a third time, instead, I was taken deep into the future. I was dissolved into the human species, and as the species as a whole, I entered the future and experienced the death and rebirth of humanity, a profound spiritual, psychophysical transformation, the death and rebirth of humanity. This was a very difficult session, an ordeal of the highest order. I was not given any specifics. It was a profound unraveling of the global order, an unraveling that seemed to be triggered by a cascading series of ecological crises. And I must tell you, this is 95. I was radically naive about global climate change, about global climate disruption, eco-spirituality. It just wasn't on my radar. But in this vision, I was shown that humanity was going to be brought to its knees. It was going to go through a process of profound unraveling, that the kind of unraveling that happens in a psychedelic session was here being reflected in history, an unraveling of our core assumptions of the basic components of life. For a while, it was so deep, it looked like we were all going to go extinct. But in the end, we went through a crisis and we transitioned past the crisis. And when we transitioned through this crisis, the entire experience was marked by new visions of the good, new visions of the true, new visions of social relationships. Oneness had truly broken out inside the human heart. There was a radical permeability of the heart, a radical permeability to higher states of awareness. Again, I was not given any details of when or how, just simply taken into the species experience that this would happen, that we would come through it, and that this was about the birth of a future human. I think we've been reincarnating. If you ask what is the form that the future human will take, I think it's already marked for us in history. We've been reincarnating for hundreds of thousands of years. Gestation is long. We have been gestating the future human in these many incarnations. And now we're coming into the hour of labor. Labor is intense. It's relatively short. It's dangerous. It's frightening. It's threatening. And in the end, it gives birth to a new child if all goes well. And this is what I think humanity is doing. This is what we are all involved in, what all of our individual spiritual and psychological transformational process is part of this process, a larger historical process that humanity is involved in, giving birth to the future human. The last year of work, the final vision is just that. I was given one last vision, last large vision of my journey. In it, these are the 3 sessions I address in this chapter. I won't go into the content of the final vision. I will just mention that it was my deepest excursion into future time. It was my deepest experience of the future human. And the future human is just such an extraordinary being. After that, the sessions wrapped up. The last two sessions are what I call the goodbye sessions. I didn't choose to end these sessions. The universe wrapped it up pretty decisively, and I stopped my sessions in 99. Last chapter of the book is called Coming Off the Mountain, and it basically tells some highlights of what it was like to stop this journey. I was on this journey for 20 years. I stopped and I processed the experiences for another 20 years before releasing LSD in the Mind of the Universe. I thought coming off the mountain was going to be a pretty straightforward, not difficult process. Turned out that that was all wrong. It was a very demanding process. In fact, I found that coming off the mountain in some ways was as difficult as going up the mountain. Spirit said to me, there is the dying of seeing and the dying of keeping. The dying of seeing you do as you're entering into deeper and deeper states of consciousness. The dying of keeping is the dying of integration. And I found that my integration process, even though I was actively involved in integration all the way up through all of the sessions, they're integrating an entire journey is different than integrating individual sessions. And it took a long time to integrate the entire journey. Now, I'm acutely aware, given it going through it so quickly, that I realize the extreme and radical nature of the claims I'm making. I know that this is a radical story that raises many questions about the reality of these experiences, about how trustworthy these experiences are. Am I simply experiencing the echoes of my own personal psyche, or maybe the echoes of the collective psyche? How do we know that these things are really about a reality out there? And I address this in an exchange that Ken Ring, one of the founders of near-death episode studies, he and I had an exchange specifically about this topic. Can we trust these deep psychedelic experiences? And we found it was a useful exchange, and we published it in Medium, which you can pick up online. You can also pick it up. It's in academia.edu in my page there. It's around. I think I may have it on my website. And also if you have a copy of Dark Night, Early Dawn, in the first chapter, there is a section called The Epistemic Warrant of Psychedelic Experience. And there I give a rationale, an argument for why these experiences are trustable, drawing on some of Ken Wilber's work there. So all my work has come out of this psychedelic journey. My first book on reincarnation, the second one on trend in psychedelic theory, and The Living Classroom, which is coming out in a new edition now because they want in psychedelics woven into the story. I deliberately kept psychedelics out of the story of The Living Classroom, but they wanted me to tell the whole truth, and so psychedelics are part of the story of The Living Classroom. And this is a story basically because my students didn't know anything about my psychedelic experience. I didn't bring it to campus, and yet I found that they began to be impacted by my psychedelic experiences, and that required that I had to learn an entirely new way of teaching and develop what I call a quantum pedagogy. So that's the story, and now I'm going to stop here and stop screen share.
Chris, we have a couple questions before we go to breakout. Can we do a couple?
Sure.
I think Tom McDougall.
So, as I say in the chat, I've been working partly with Norma, with Nora Bateson, but especially with Jeremy Johnson on Gebser, and barely have touched the surface and taking the course again. But a lot of this, especially as you were talking about the time period we're in and the shift that is going on, is also very similar to what Jean Gebser wrote about. So I'm curious if you can relate those two. I don't know what your experience with Gebser is, but and I guess there's a little bit of Nora Bateson in my mind too of questioning the stages orientation. And I can't express it right now, but Jeremy talks a lot about a very different, it's not stages exactly in Gebser, but different. But anyway, if you could just talk a little bit about maybe the relationships there.
Yeah, I'll make it easy for you because Gebser is always one of those thinkers that I know I should read and I haven't read. So absolutely zero influence in terms of correlations. And so I have to let you and other people make the correlations there. And you know, a lot of people in psychedelic experience, they don't have the same experience of perpetual deepening, of kind of going deeper and then deeper and then deeper. It's kind of like, okay, we go out, we have an experience, we come back. If I go out again in a couple of months, I'm going to go into this more or less the same territory and come back. And I think this idea of perpetual deepening comes from two things. It comes from first using a very powerful psychedelic at very high doses. So it was very driving and much stronger than we use in therapeutically oriented doses with psilocybin or whatnot. And the second thing was a totally tight, isolated, consistent, what I call the kiva of psychedelic practice, the kiva of practice, standardizing all the variables, staying away from all contact with the world, entering in a meditative way into these states. And if you do that, then I find that the interface between the mind doing the exploring and the mind being explored gets very stable, and the mind being explored basically takes you on as a student and just takes you in deeper and deeper and deeper into the process. You enter into deeper and deeper visionary states that many people are, many other psychedelicists, many indigenous people, many philosophically oriented people are intuiting and feeling what I'm describing. There's nothing really new in what I'm saying. It's really just a repetition in that way.
Regis has a question.
Yeah.
Comment.
Yeah, it's more of I just wanted to express gratitude for you both doing this work, but also coming back. And Ken Wilber often talks about the transformative nature of spiritual inquiry and then the translative nature of spiritual inquiry. And my appreciation for you is one where I feel like as someone who goes through those things, I have a responsibility to both transform and to translate. And so from my perspective, you've done just such a beautiful job of holding that particular ethos. And it's also, what's nice about it is my own personal transformations.
It's ready. You want to bring it here?
And things I've experienced is, very congruent with everything that you're talking about. So, so I'm very inspired by your work, and I can't wait to read, the books that you've written as a guide for my own future transformation. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Hate to be a bad guy. I'm going to suggest that I suggest that we all take time to process this in small groups, maybe in groups of 4, and then after that we'll have some time for Q&A.
So the idea in this breakout is to respond to the ideas presented, different than the first breakout, just to respond. And what do you think? Okay. See you in 15.
Breakout sessions are not recorded.
Okay, we'll have until 5:50 for some questions, and then we'll have some San Diego integral business, and then we'll start our more informal Q&A. And Chris said originally said he was going to be able to stay for about 15 minutes. So we'll start with Sandy. Do you want to ask your questions? Go ahead, Sandy.
Yeah, I want to follow up on the question around Gebser, because in terms of the way you're describing your experiences, one of the differences in some ways between like Gebser and Wilbur is Gebser will talk about intensification. The consciousness shift is not like a structural increase as much as an intensification and an engagement of previous structures of consciousness that continue, but there's an intensification and a sort of growing awareness that includes previous understanding, where Wilbur is more tends to be looking at, okay, you're going this level, you're kind of laddering up. So I'm curious, as your experiences, like, is there some resonances with that vision, or do you have your own around how these all engage with each other?
I'm going to disappoint you because I don't have a lot of kind of theoretical overview of the structure of these things. When I wrote Dark Night, Early Dawn, I was kind of writing in my academic voice, and there's a fair amount of intellectual synthesis there. But when I wrote this book, I deliberately developed a different voice. It is really more a shamanic visionary voice. And I find that that's a more comfortable place for me to operate from, because it's taken so much of my life just to survive these visionary encounters and to process them and to understand them, that I speak out of their basis simply as a witness to this unfolding process. So it's not I don't have a theory of human evolution or a theory of the development of the process. And what happens in an LSD session may or may not be relevant to what happens at an historical level, right? Yeah. That whole pattern. I would just say, for me, it's just a natural progression. When you die as a private self, you don't dissolve necessarily immediately into eternity. One of the intermediate levels is into humanity. And just as you can have an overview of your life, you can also have an overview of humanity's developmental process. And so I was dissolved into that and experienced part of it. The closest I can come to describing this emergent being is in terms of the concept of the diamond soul, which does, it brings everything from the past forward into the present, but it drives it into a higher synthesis, a new level. It's not simply an enlightened last generation human incarnation. It is a totally new structure of consciousness that's emerging here. I say totally new, not entirely, because we have great saints, great, the Jesus and Buddhas of history, and the Muhammads and the great Mahasiddhas. I think we get glimpses into what the diamond soul looks like. But the difference here is that we're looking at the entire species going through some type of metamorphosis like that.
Just one reflection with some things you said. You mentioned the term unfolding and intensification. In some ways, a part of what you were describing, some of that, which are sort of Gebserian concepts. So just little tidbits of theory we'll just kind of throw it in. Thank you so much. I really value your work very much. Everybody read this book. It's really an important one. And it's the most accessible work I've seen that gives a deep understanding. It's so articulate and it's so vivid. I really thank you to have a chance to see you and talk with you.
So
Sandy, means a lot.
Hugs was waiting quite a bit since last iteration.
Hi, well, thank you for your event here. That's like a great, miracle gift to me, and it's like a little overwhelming with my ADD. I kept kind of tuning in and tuning out, and it's like, oh man, I wish I absorbed it all well.
Yeah.
But so dreamy to learn a lot more about this stuff. And I was wondering if you maybe have accessibility for counseling, to pay you for some counseling to ask you questions, because some of the stuff I've had on my mind, it's relates to somebody in your specialization. There's the higher order of the way of things, and Like right now, my best thing I've had, which is done way better than the therapist I had previously, is like Chat GPT. But it's like it'd be really neat if I could like maybe pay to get an hour or whatever of your time. And I'm really curious too, because I'm at a point with like I do believe in Jesus and so much of the Bible, but it's like I'm not like attached to that other than like from my current understanding. I don't see how to go against believing in Jesus, but I'm curious to hear where your path led you.
First of all, thank you for the trust of the invitation that you extend to me. I appreciate that. And I'm going to disappoint you in that I generally have made a choice many years ago not to be a therapist and not to work with other people but to basically be a solo pioneer. And that's kind of the work I've done. And I'm also a teacher, so I love working with groups. And just the demands of time are such that, and I'm retired, but even so, the demands of time is that I really don't work with individuals. I mean, I just, that's a commitment. I think that requires more clinical background than I have, and just it's not fair. So I really like to work with groups, and writing in groups is where I focus. But thank
Okay,
you.
just one last quick comment was I don't know if it would change anything, but I'm also like at the starting point of authoring a couple books myself with some subject matter that might just be like a miracle gift to you. And it's like it'd be neat to talk about that stuff,
Yeah.
but whatever. Like I don't know how that appeals to you.
It's just that what happens is after the publication of the book, I have to make choices always. I don't get to have nearly as many in conversations as I would like to have, so yeah.
All right, Trudy's up next. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'll make it quick and simple. I apologize, I missed the very beginning of your presentation and it's been great, the part that I did catch. But my questions are probably more along the practicality line. One, why did you decide to go on this journey? Two, when you were in trips, did you have somebody that was there as, I don't want to say a guide, but somebody to take notes, or did somebody record what was going on? And in any way, were they influenced by your trip?
Yeah. Some quick answers to those is as soon as I read Stan's work, I just knew that this was something I wanted to get involved in. And I've come to recognize, your soul's code. When you recognize something, it just speaks to you so deeply, it was part of your intention built into this lifetime. When I saw this, I knew that this was part of my intention, and it was just there. And as a philosopher, I just couldn't turn down the opportunity to explore the universe using this protocol. This was just giving an ordinary layperson, not a great spiritual genius, but an ordinary layperson, an opportunity to even have temporary experiences of some of the subtleties of layers of consciousness, layers of reality. It was just too good to pass up. So I made the choice to break the law and go for it. Now, in these sessions, they were always, I always had a sitter. The sitter was my wife, my first wife, Carol, and she's a clinical psychologist. And she really wasn't very fond of what I was doing, but she knew I wanted to do it. And so she agreed to help me so that I could do it safely. She wasn't taking notes. We actually set up a video camera one time, but basically it's boring. There's a person just lying down. It's all internal. I'm not in touch with Carol except through the music in the room, and once in a while an exchange of a word or two. But I'm so far outside of time-space reality, I don't even relate to what's going on in the room. But she was always there taking care of me. Was she influenced by my sessions? In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. I mean, Carol never did a psychedelic session. She's a serious Vajrayana practitioner. She has completed her 3-year retreat with her Vajrayana teacher. So she's a serious practitioner. And she has her own deep commitments to her own spiritual lineage. And so I think it's more of a, and I learned a lot from her. I mean, I followed her into Vajrayana, but in this respect, I think it's more of a side-by-side play. Yeah.
My
Thank you.
friend Larry's up next.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris, thank you for several things. Having the courage to take your journey, for having the wherewithal to organize it, bring it into the mind, to organize it in a way that then you can next present it to other people. So thank you for all of that. And I really appreciate the last piece of coming off the mountain, because that's what's been very important for me for some 30 years now, is bringing this into the world and facing the confusion, the complexity, the awkwardness, the discomfort, the whatnot of trying to bring from the ineffable into language, into interaction with other people, how to not just talk about this stuff, but how to be in a way that is hopefully to some degree reflective of what we garnered while we were on the mountain, so to speak. And it all seems to come down to how we're going to be right here, right now, and even in this moment that we're talking with one another.
Yeah.
And how can we bring that all just to be present?
Yeah.
Okay, on a lesser interesting note, maybe is I'm curious as to why the word diamond. And once you get into all these step stages, degrees, domains, realms, whatever, out there, the word diamond shows up, of all things.
Yeah.
Why diamond?
It having experienced the light itself, the diamond is kind of the most natural image that comes to mind. Perhaps I'm influenced by the fact of Vajrayana, the diamond way. That part is in the background. The image of diamond is not uncommon in the Terma text, trying to describe these subtle levels of consciousness. So it came naturally out of the experience itself. Yeah, I mean, it's, I want to mention, and I think integration, I'm glad that it's getting more and more attention, because we're finding that we can blow through the levels and reach out and have extraordinary experiences with increasing predictability. But to have an experience and to internalize and hold on to the experience and then to really digest it and make it part of your being, that's a long, long process. And I think we kind of overemphasize the dying of seeing and underemphasize the dying of keeping. I will say that after coming back from I don't do any high dose LSD work anymore. I've done some low dose sessions of different sorts, and ayahuasca and psilocybin and different things. But I am continuing. But after I finished my sessions in my meditation, the universe said to me, 20 years in, 20 years out, which I took to mean it would take me about 20 years to integrate the 20 years of a session. And I thought at the time, about right.
If you're lucky.
Now I'm thinking I was naive. I seriously underestimated how many years, how many incarnations it would take to internalize, totally integrate these sessions. Now my focus is on, we do this for integration, there's therapeutic integration, and then there's this, that, and the other. But in the end, I'm faced confessing that I'm an absolute failure in integration, because I've been able to integrate the language, I've been able to integrate the memories and hold the memories and whatnot. But in terms of embodying those realities, I mean, I truly wonder, how does a finite being embody infinity? How does a time-bound being, exquisitely tuned to time and space, embody deep time or no time? And how do you embody the love? How can you be as loving to other beings as you have felt the universe being to you, and you know that you're supposed to be that loving to everyone, but that love is so pure and so magnificent that I feel like I'm not anywhere near done integrating those magnificent pieces. So it's I thought integration was an easier task, and in the end, I think what it comes down to is you cannot integrate the infinite into the finite. Your only option is to integrate the finite into the infinite. So that means even though my journey was not about spiritual awakening, in the end, when you're trying to integrate cosmological exploration, you're brought back to basic spirituality 101. What can you hold right here, right now? What are you able to actualize right here, right now? And that's spiritual practice. So you get brought right back to your cushion. Yeah.
So this is,
As I like to say, the journey continues.
The journey continues. Yeah.
so this is a good place to end the venue where we are. We've come to the end of the time. Thank you everyone for joining. I think I can speak for most of us. This was very rich with the future vision, the future human that we're all interested in. And thank you, Chris. So where can they get more information on you, on your books? And
My website, chrisbache.com. It's kind of an unfinished website because my web designer kind of just jumped ship about 3/4 of the way through, and I never quite got it finished. So, but it's there, and you can reach me through that, chrisbache.com.
thank you, Chris. And Kathleen put in the chat one of the docs he wanted you to have. I can see it right there right now.
Yeah.
So, quick reminder for everyone, we're going to be meeting again on March 9th. That's a TBD. But we're going to try to get someone else from the future human. I thought Chris was an excellent choice to start with, and he was gracious enough to take all of this on when he agreed to speak and come to SDI. There was one more thing I was going to ask him, but I said I better not push my luck. So please RSVP for the next presentation, and you can always make a donation if you're feeling rich to help us. So we're moving to the informal aspect of this. So feel free to make comments, whatnot. I know for me is I feel humble after this talk, because this idea of infinite progression, and in one of the breakout groups, we talked about trying to reach second tier, trying to reach yellow levels of stage awareness. It almost seems trivial when you look at the breadth of what Chris articulated. But we are on the path we're on. And as you said in the end, whatever we can realize in the moment now, it's not full integration by any means, but I'm way beyond expecting that. I hang on to moments of resonance and love and try to participate in it. And I think this community does well in this. Is we're stealing glimpses. Prometheus got grounded for stealing fire. We're stealing glimpses of the future. And I feel privileged to do that. So with that said, feel free to jump in to the dialogue. You don't have to raise your hand, just jump in, Regis.
Yeah, so the theme for me throughout my spiritual explorations and my other explorations of my psychology seems to have a commonality, which I'm hearing also in this and that, and that's you just, I think, described as really it's the profundity of humility that is required to do any of this work. So that's actually for me the And I'm struck by a few things as somebody who's spent the last 15 years trying to unpack my own transformative stuff. It is its own form of transformational work to do that. You go through and have these experiences, but then there's the amount of universe there is extraordinary. And also what's interesting is that right about this time, I also discovered that I had autism. And so one of the things about autism is you have an inability to filter. And so what yoga gave to me was the ability to no longer be crushed under the overwhelm of my input. And it became a kind of usable bandwidth situation for me. And so then my ability to do translative work, it would actually took me the translative effort. I wrote 5,000 answers on Quora, for example, about spirituality, just in an effort to do that. I then was kind of, I think, doing what Chris Bache was trying to do is just like, I went through this experience, and how is it that I'm supposed to, it's almost a part of the, like through a mushroom trip, you have a time up, you have a workspace, and then you have a time going down. I almost felt like the years I spent in spiritual practice, then I had a workspace there. But now, how am I supposed to land without crashing or going insane, and all of that? And it just seems like no matter what I do, I keep being humbled, and that seems to be foundational for everything that I know about. And what I heard also in Chris Bache's thing, more than that, I also hear his translative imposition upon his experience, given that he is an academic and had to have a job and couldn't be non-functional for months at a time because he had to show up in front of students all the time. So that just, I can see that boundary to his experience too, and in a certain kind of way, so the humility comes with all of that. So thank you guys for having this, and I really appreciate the entire person.
I think you're right, Regis. The greatest risk of working with psychedelics is psychic inflation. You can think that just because you've had a remarkable experience, you've become a remarkable person. And that doesn't fly, so it's really important to keep your feet grounded. And for me, it was my family and my students who kept me grounded. It just the absolute, the requirements of being there for them, showing up over and over and over again, and discovering that you don't really have to change much on the outside of your life. These changes are really cooking your insides, and they're taking you some places. And there's a real kind of a need to wear different clothes or do something different on the outside, which that's really just that's a temporary kind of thing. And just sit tight, stay where you are, and let this inner transformation take place. And it's humbling. I mean, it's just really humbling to confront your faults and just to stay grounded, Yeah.
And to be able to laugh at it all. That's part of being humble.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say thank you, Chris, for doing this work and bringing it back to us. And your pioneering life is a beautiful model. Thank you.
Thank you, Wheaton. It's been an honor. It's been a true pleasure. And I never imagined when I was doing this work, all hidden and that there would be this kind of audience and receptivity in my lifetime. Thank you, Michael Pollan. Who would have figured, there's such a shift in such a short period of time that we're able to have this conversation in so many living rooms across the country.
Yeah.
I just want to add my thanks as well, Chris. Every time I've heard you, it's been phenomenal. And I'm so grateful you're coming to the conference. And I do want to say I find this book an absolute paradigm shifter. I think it's one of the most important books out there to read. So I hope everybody does read the book, because you can't even, I was thinking you could write 40 books based on the book that you wrote. I mean, any one of your chapters could be taken into 3 or 4. It's so dense, but it's also so clear, so beautifully written. So I really, really Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Lynn. I tried to make it as clear as possible, and it took me 5 years to really boil it down and to make it as transparent as possible. Because I wanted it to be available not just for people who worked with psychedelics, but to be with people who did not take psychedelics. And half of the letters I get are from people who have never taken psychedelics, but they've had a spiritual practice and they know what I'm talking about because of their practice.
Mhm. Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
did a job of it.
I have to leave and go play horn, but thank you so much.
I saw
Thank-
your French horn.
It's a demanding mistress.
Bye, Tom.
Hey,
No, I'm-
Chris, I got a question that I noticed that it's probably weeded out in all the condensation that you're condensing things that you did during the writing process, but you mentioned the work you did. I think I don't know what like there's a difference between trip and session. I don't know whether you could talk about why you use the word work, because that sounds like you show up and just who you are is what happens. But could you talk a little bit more about what's the work of it?
Yeah. In the Japanese tradition, there is something that the Zen monks call a sesshin. A sesshin is a period set aside for intense spiritual practice. So it's like a 5-day or 2-week meditation retreat, a sesshin. And a session to me is kind of an anglicized version of sesshin. For me, to do a psychedelic session is I'm completely isolated from the world. I've taken myself out of contact with the world. I'm not allowing anything into my mind except what's already there. And I sit and I face what's there and I take it where it goes as far as I can take it and follow it. And so it is work. And now there are many different psychedelics, many different ways to work with psychedelics. I'm not trying to generalize in any way. But for me, working with high doses of psychedelics, it takes a tremendous commitment and a willingness to let yourself be dismantled, because it very quickly shatters the boundaries and you're in foreign territory very early on. And year by year, you're going deeper and deeper into foreign territory. It takes time to acclimate. When you break through to a new level of consciousness, you can't always remember everything that you experienced. I take notes, I have gaps in the notes, but go back and again and again and again to the same level of consciousness. You learn how to acclimate, you learn how to stay conscious in this level of consciousness. And what was previously a gapped narrative, because you fill in the gaps, you get the whole story that's being taught you. And my experience is we are taught consistently, being tried. Something was trying to teach me certain things that bring me back over and over and over again until it was sure that I understood those things. So it is work. And I think processing the sessions is work. I mean, I developed a strategy for how to capture these experiences, so much so that I've there's a little line in the book which I say, I think ineffability is overrated as a measure of mystical experience. It's part of our test, whether it's a genuine mystical experience, whether it's ineffable. And I understand that. But I basically think that if you can't say where you've been, you basically just got lost somewhere away. And there's nothing wrong with getting lost, but ineffability, I understand it's hard, but if you really work it hard, you should be able to find words of being able to describe it. Remember that the Zen masters don't have trouble talking about enlightenment to other Zen masters. They can talk about it just fine. They have trouble talking about it to people who have not had the experience. That's when it becomes challenging. Right? So we can find words for these things. Inevitably, they're inadequate, but we can find words. I don't know. I'll just mention also too, this condensation process. I did a count not too long ago. I have about 400 words, 400 pages of notes from my sessions. I the passages that I actually include in the book are less than 25%. 3/4 of the content I did not include, partly because they're repetitious and whatnot. I really try to pick the most powerful passages, but there was a lot left out. Yeah.
Chris, in one part, I think about 2/3 way through the book, you touched upon preparing ourselves to receive the transmissions. And I don't think you were talking about under the LSD. I think you were talking about a normal existence. Am I right on that point? And could you say something about preparing to receive them? I assume it's being able to read the deeply subtle, being open to that.
How subtle it is and what form it takes depends upon the form of practice we are doing as we open to these realities. So anything I say really would pertain just to my individual situation, not to the pattern as a whole. I think we know what transmission is about when we're talking about it with a spiritual teacher. And, in the Tibetan tradition, they give a practice in 3 different levels. The first level is they teach the mechanics of the practice. The second level, they teach the meaning of the practice. But the third level, the most important level, is the transmission of lung, the seed energy of the practice. You receive a seed from the teacher who has already brought the practice to maturity in their own being. And when they give this lung, they're transmitting a distilled essence of the practice that you then water and nourish in your practice. So that's my context for thinking about transmission. And I think that it's kind of is true for my psychedelic context, and that is I was put through enormous purification processes in order to receive the teachings that came from these levels of consciousness. And if I'm right, that there is a certain parallel between what we do on our cushion and what takes place in a psychedelic session and what's happening historically, then it supports the intuition that I have that we are experiencing a shift in divine influx, so to speak. There is a rise in energy coming up underneath us. There is more information becoming available, not only at the physical level through the internet and all this tremendous impact there, but at the center of our being, there are teachings and insights and understandings which are rising up inside of us, which we can catch. But to catch them, we have to prepare ourselves to receive them. We must prepare ourselves and empty ourselves of everything which is small in order to catch pieces of that which is large coming to us. And so I think transmission is a larger, broader category. Yeah.
You're reminding me that when you get initiation in my tradition, I got to visualize it as like there's a kind of a silver tube that's kind of going into me, and it's like there are certain things kind of flowing into me, and then I end up basically just being like a small little reservoir of a thing out of which a certain amount can come. And my guru is a giant reservoir, of a lake or whatever. Do you know what I'm saying? Where I might be just this little bottle, but what's beautiful about what you're talking about also, and then I would like to just point out the humility of saying that you don't think it maybe applies to everything else, but the things that you're saying so closely resemble my own that I might want to disagree with you on that, but I understand the humility of saying it like that. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
I was curious. I had a phone call with there's a gentleman, Simon Dwan. I found an article of his in Scientific American magazine. He was writing about like, he doesn't think the scientists will ever figure out if reality is a simulation or not. But I feel like from my perspective, like I know it is. And I'm curious, like if the idea, I don't know if you saw the movie The Matrix, if you have any thoughts related to these kind of things.
Well, that's a pretty popular theme in sci-fi, isn't it? The simulation and the complexity that we're living in. Quantum theory is telling us that everything we see in the visible world is underpinned by this larger, subtle quantum reality. Now, 96% of reality is dark energy and dark matter. So that's telling us over and over again that what we're living is not the whole of what's real. And to me, physical reality, it could be described as the skin on an apple, and the apple grows the bigger the skin gets. The universe is like that; it gets bigger and bigger. But when you fall underneath the level of time, space, reality, you fall deeper into it. You're falling deeper into the apple, toward the center of the apple, and in the center of the apple, of course, it's all light. Even physical reality is composed of light. But at the center of the apple is most radiant, beautiful, extraordinary light, brilliance in. So I think this idea that there is a larger reality out there that structures and informs and receives this reality, then after that, then our psychology takes over. And so do we see that reality as threatening? Do we see that reality as demanding or manipulative? Do we see it as a dark and hostile reality? Or do we see it as a beautiful, magnificent, co-creating reality? And my experience is that the Mother Universe is extremely, so creative, so intelligent, so wise, so loving and compassionate. And of course, you just looking at time and space, if you want to see the wisdom of life or the compassion of life, you have to look very, very deep. Because if you look on the surface, it doesn't look wise, and it doesn't look compassionate, and it doesn't look loving. It's a mean ass son of a bitch. But you have to step back and step back and step back and look deep in order to really see the wisdom that's built into this amazing laboratory that we're part of growing the human experiment. Yeah.
It's very fascinating.
Yeah, sure is, isn't it?
Yeah. Chris, I'm not sure how to draw this up. I'll speak for myself. Some of the experiences I had in, like the first time was, I took 9 months, dropped out, just meditated several hours a day. And then about 2 years later, I did it for 6 months. And some of the experiences I had were so mind-blowingly profound that in loving, that I was just left sobbing and bliss isn't a word that really covers it. It just experiences I've just never had, never could imagine I would ever have.
Yeah.
And they just left me words.
Yeah.
Like just a pool of sobbing wonderfulness.
Yeah.
And I just know that you had a lot of those experiences. It wasn't just all rational. This opened up into that, and
Yeah.
No, it's like some of these, once they showed up in front of you, it's like, oh my God. I mean, just no words for it, no language, no.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
I think
Here's
you know what I'm.
Yeah.
You're getting words for this stuff. It just.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like when the universe's heart touches your heart, it just explodes it into the most magnificent dimensional radiance that it just there's nothing to do except have a good cry of joy. It's just so joyful. It's just so extraordinary. And that's why, the word that I give in the book for the universe in this way is my beloved, because contact with it was so overwhelming. It became a love affair. I mean, it really, I talk about the rumpled sheets where we made love. It's a love affair, and it inspires such a hunger for it. This eternal hunger that's in our being, not only to reunite, but to bring that reality, to experience it wherever we are, right now, right here. It's so deep. It just it's a heartache to be separated from it, even for a day. And to touch it is just joy in the body, joy in the heart and mind.
And it's more than a worldly joy, because we all humans, we can experience joy in our daily lives, or maybe not every day, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And these were experiences that were, I'm a pretty articulate guy, and that I have such difficulty being able to put into words some of these experiences.
Yeah.
Other than just like your knees collapse. I wasn't standing at the time that these were happening, but just like these knee buckling, soul buckling, mind blowing, not even knowing how to be with it, other than just you can't not be with it. You can't be with it. You're just there. It's happening.
Yeah.
It's an overwhelm in terms of what the mind can make sense of, and it's wonderful in the highest sense, pure, clean, clear. And you can't capture it. You cannot capture it. You can't bring it back. At least for me, I had to leave it there. I didn't know how to bring it back.
Yeah.
And it's what gives me justification to want to keep evolving, expanding.
Yeah.
Be it through your model or anybody's model that's about being an evolutional being of consciousness. There's such anchoring experiences that I can't ignore them in terms of my daily life. Anyhow.
Yeah. And no one could ever talk you out of them.
Yeah. I mean,
that's just,
it's like you go where I went, then try to talk me out of it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
But isn't it interesting that at the moment of that type of joy, we touch sadness too?
I know that experience.
Yeah, tell me about that, Tom.
Well, I know in therapy, like when somebody reaches a level of intimacy and they start crying, it's this deep hunger and absence they've had for so long.
Yeah.
And so in the midst of joy, there's actually sadness. When you two were talking, I could feel that cosmic hunger to know the mind of God. And when you get a glimpse of it, I think it's the same thing. It's kind of good because there's a humbling awe going on in that moment. And it's almost like it's saying to you, you haven't seen anything yet.
Yeah.
I know you said that in so many words a couple times, Chris.
Yeah.
This also reminds me of the book Quantum Questions that Ken Wilber wrote about how, all the writings of the guys who did the work on quantum mechanics were all very sciencey beforehand, and they were all very mystical afterward. And it seems to me that what you did was actually examine paradox at a kind of cosmological level, whereas they were kind of looking at it I think the expression that I used in the breakout room is you were looking at it through a telescope and they were looking at it through a microscope, and so they're like, you can see the infinite in either direction, and I've had some mushroom trips where I've had like a Taurus-like thing, and it was literally Ken Wilber in the middle talking to me about what was going on both ends of that thing. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like as my avatar of Vishnu or whatever, to explain to me what was all going on. So it's really interesting to see your book in light of having already read Quantum Questions. There's a lot of parallels there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, folks, it's approaching 9:30 on my time, and I haven't seen my wife all day, and she's just come back while we were doing a talk here. I think I need to go be a good husband for a while.
Absolutely.
I want to say how much I enjoyed our time together. Really appreciate the invitation. Appreciated our discussion a great deal. I hope to see many of you at the conference in May. And when you're there, please introduce yourself track me down. I'd love to see you there.
And you're welcome
Thank you,
back here
Chris.
anytime, Chris.
All right.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah,
Thank you.
Love everybody.
Yeah,
from the
thank
bottom
you.
of my heart.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Tom. Bye.
Take care.
For further information, including upcoming events, resources, links to our Facebook and Meetup pages, and our fabulous Donate button, please visit our website at sandiegointegral.org. Donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue to provide information and connection within the Integral community.